Hello everyone and welcome back to Mr. Sleepy Crime. I know many of you enjoy listening to these stories as you fall asleep. So before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from. And if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe, it really helps the channel grow. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that this story involves real people and real tragedies. We tell these stories not for entertainment, but to remember the victims and perhaps help others recognize the warning signs that could prevent similar tragedies. For the best experience, feel free to lower the volume a little, just enough to let the story gently carry you off to sleep. Alright, please get comfortable, dim the lights, and let's dive into tonight's first story. Tonight we journey to the quiet farming community of Traer, Iowa, where beneath the surface of small-town life, a web of deception, betrayal, and ultimately murder would shatter a family forever. This is the story of Ryan Cooper, a 42-year-old husband and father whose life was cut short by those closest to him. So as we settle in, let me tell you about a case that would rock this small Iowa town to its core. In the heart of Iowa's farmland, where cornfields stretch endlessly toward the horizon and everyone knows their neighbor's name, Ryan Cooper had built what seemed like an ordinary life. At 42 years old, Ryan was a fixture in the small town of Traer, population just over 1,700. He was the kind of man who embodied the values of rural Iowa, hard-working, dependable, and devoted to his family. Ryan and his wife Karina had created what appeared to be a typical American family. They shared a home on the outskirts of town, where the sounds of farm equipment and the rustle of corn in the wind provided a constant, comforting backdrop. Their house was filled with the laughter and chaos that comes with raising children, and to anyone looking from the outside, the Coopers seemed to have achieved the American dream. But as is often the case in true crime, the facade of normalcy can hide the darkest of secrets. In small towns like Traer, gossip travels fast. By early 2021, whispers had begun to circulate about the state of the Cooper marriage. Neighbors noticed things, subtle changes in routine, tension that seemed to hang in the air when Ryan and Karina were seen together. And most notably, rumors about Karina's relationship with another man. The other man in question was Houston Danker, a name that would become inextricably linked with the Cooper family tragedy. As spring turned to early summer in 2021, the whispers in Traer grew louder. People began to suspect that Karina Cooper was having an affair, and that suspicion was not unfounded. In small farming communities, secrets are hard to keep. Someone always sees something, a car parked where it shouldn't be, two people talking too intimately at the local diner, or simply the way someone's eyes light up when a particular name is mentioned. For Karina and Houston, their secret was becoming an open secret, the kind that everyone knows but no one speaks about directly. What made this situation particularly troubling was what Karina had apparently begun sharing with her friends. According to later testimony, at least two people would come forward to say that Karina had expressed a disturbing desire. She had spoken about wanting to shoot her husband in the face. These weren't offhand remarks made in anger, but statements that would later take on a chilling significance. The weight of maintaining a double life, the pressure of small-town scrutiny, and whatever psychological forces were at work in Karina's mind were building towards something terrible. Ryan, meanwhile, may have sensed that something was wrong. Evidence would later suggest that he might have discovered the affair, adding another layer of tension to an already volatile situation. June 18, 2021, began like any other day in the Cooper household. The children went about their evening routines, the familiar sounds of a family settling in for the night, filling the house. Ryan, following his usual pattern, settled into his favorite recliner in the living room, a piece of furniture that had become his sanctuary at the end of long days. As night fell over rural Iowa, three of the Cooper children made their way upstairs to their bedrooms. The house gradually grew quiet, with only the typical sounds of a home at rest. The hum of appliances, the settling of wooden beams, perhaps the distant sound of a television. But this night would be different. This night the quiet would be shattered by violence that would forever change the Cooper family and send shockwaves through the tight-knit community of Traer. What happened in those late evening hours remains partially shrouded in the kind of uncertainty that often surrounds domestic crimes. What we know with certainty is that sometime during the night, while Ryan sat in his recliner, perhaps watching television, perhaps dozing, perhaps simply enjoying a moment of quiet, his life came to a brutal end. The method was as shocking as it was definitive. Ryan Cooper was shot twice in the face. The shots were fired at close range, suggesting an intimate crime. one committed by someone who could get close to Ryan without raising alarm. The violence was swift and decisive, executed while the Cooper children slept peacefully upstairs, unaware that their world was being torn apart just below their feet. When the Tama County Sheriff's deputies arrived at the Cooper residence in the early morning hours of June 18, 2021, they encountered a scene that would be etched in their memories forever. The 911 call had brought them to what should have been a routine response to a domestic situation, but what they found was far from routine. Ryan Cooper's body was still in his recliner, the place where he had spent countless quiet evenings. But the peaceful domesticity of the scene was shattered by the reality of violent death. The 2 gunshot wounds to his face told a story of close-range brutality that seemed incongruous with the suburban living room setting. Perhaps even more disturbing than the crime scene itself was the tableau the deputies encountered. They found Karina Cooper sitting on top of her husband's lifeless body. The positioning was so unusual, so intimate yet horrifying, that it immediately raised questions about what had transpired in that living room. Deputies are trained to process crime scenes with professional detachment, but the sight of a wife positioned on top of her murdered husband's body was something that went beyond the merely tragic into the realm of the deeply unsettling. It suggested either a profound psychological break or a calculated attempt to stage a scene. Though at that moment, with the investigation just beginning, it was impossible to know which. In the immediate aftermath of Ryan's death, the investigation proceeded, as these cases typically do. The Tama County Sheriff's Office began the methodical process of collecting evidence, interviewing witnesses, and trying to piece together the events that led to Ryan Cooper's murder. Initially, as is often the case when a spouse is found dead under violent circumstances, Karina became the focus of investigation. Statistics show that when someone is murdered in their home, particularly in cases involving gunshot wounds at close range, the perpetrator is most often someone known to the victim. In cases where married individuals are murdered, the spouse is statistically the most likely perpetrator, but building a case requires more than statistics and suspicion. Investigators needed evidence, witnesses, and a clear motive. What they began to uncover painted a picture of a marriage under severe strain, complicated by infidelity and perhaps financial or personal pressures that had pushed someone to the ultimate act of violence. The investigation would reveal that Ryan's death was not a crime of passion or a sudden eruption of domestic violence. Instead, evidence would suggest something far more calculated, a planned murder that had been discussed and orchestrated rather than spontaneously executed. As investigators dug deeper into the Cooper family's life, the rumors that had circulated through Traer began to solidify into facts. Karina's relationship with Houston Danker was not just suspected adultery. It was a full-blown affair that had apparently consumed both participants. Phone records, witness statements, and other evidence would paint a picture of 2 people who had become completely absorbed in their relationship, seemingly without regard for the consequences. In small towns, affairs are particularly devastating because privacy is nearly impossible to maintain. Everyone knows everyone else's business, and the social pressure can be enormous. But this affair would prove to be more than just a betrayal of marriage vows. Evidence would emerge suggesting that Karina and Houston had not simply been content to continue their secret relationship. They had actively discussed eliminating the obstacle to their being together permanently. The conversations between Karina and her friends, in which she had expressed a desire to shoot Ryan in the face, would take on a sinister new meaning. These were not just the angry words of a frustrated wife. They were apparently expressions of genuine intent, discussions of a plan that would eventually be carried out with horrific precision. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that Ryan Cooper's murder was not the work of a single person acting alone. Instead, evidence pointed to a conspiracy between Karina and Houston Danker, a plot to murder Ryan that had been planned and executed with cold calculation. The nature of their conspiracy would gradually be revealed through forensic evidence, witness testimony, and the digital trail that modern relationships invariably leave behind. Text messages, phone calls, and other communications would provide prosecutors with a roadmap of how 2 people had planned and carried out murder. What makes this case particularly chilling is the premeditation involved. This was not a crime of passion, not a moment of rage that spiraled out of control. Instead, it was the methodical planning of a spouse's murder, carried out while children slept upstairs, executed in the most intimate of settings, the family living room. The conspiracy would also reveal the psychological dynamics at play between Karina and Houston, who was the driving force behind the murder plot. Were they equally culpable, or had one manipulated the other into participating in this ultimate betrayal? These questions would become central to understanding not just what happened, but why it happened. For nearly 3 years after Ryan Cooper's death, his family and the community of Truro waited for justice. The investigation was thorough and methodical, as it needed to be for such a serious crime. Building a case for first-degree murder requires absolute certainty, ironclad evidence, and a narrative that can convince a jury beyond a reasonable doubt. During this period, the Cooper children, who had lost their father and would eventually see their mother charged with his murder, had to navigate an impossible situation. They were living with the trauma of their father's violent death, while dealing with the uncertainty of not knowing when or if those responsible would be held accountable. The community of Truro, meanwhile, was dealing with its own form of trauma. Small towns are not supposed to be places where spouses murder each other while children sleep upstairs. They're supposed to be safe havens where everyone looks out for each other, where the most serious crimes are property disputes or the occasional DUI. The Cooper murder had shattered that sense of security. Finally, in February 2024, nearly 3 years after Ryan's death, the wheels of justice began to turn in earnest. Karina Cooper, now 46 years old, was arrested and charged with first-degree murder in her husband's death. She was transported to the Tama County Sheriff's Office and held at the Tama County Jail. When Karina Cooper's trial finally began in July 2025, it would be moved to Lynn County due to the intense local interest in the case. The change of venue was necessary to ensure that Karina could receive a fair trial, away from the community that had been following every development in the case for years. The prosecution's case was built on several key pillars of evidence. First, there were the witness statements from Karina's friends, who testified about her expressed desire to shoot her husband in the face, statements that proved to be chillingly prophetic. Second, there was the forensic evidence from the crime scene, including blood spatter analysis and ballistics evidence that would help establish what happened in the Cooper living room that night. Perhaps most damaging to Karina's defense were the communications between her and Houston Danker that suggested the murder had been planned in advance. The digital trail of their conspiracy provided prosecutors with a detailed picture of how two people had plotted to commit the ultimate crime. The defense strategy was to portray Karina as a woman who had been manipulated by Houston Danker, someone who had been drawn into a fantasy that became a horrific reality. According to the defense, Houston was the true mastermind of the plot, and Karina was a victim of psychological manipulation who found herself in too deep to escape. Karina herself took the stand in her own defense, a risky move that would allow the jury to hear directly from the woman accused of murdering her husband. Her testimony would provide insight into her state of mind, her relationship with Houston, and her version of the events that led to Ryan's death. One of the most compelling aspects of the trial was the forensic evidence presented by the prosecution. Kenneth Martin, a forensic analyst, gave a lengthy presentation about the science behind the evidence collected at the Cooper home. This included blood spatter analysis that could help determine the position of the shooter and the victim at the time of the murder. The forensic evidence suggested that Ryan might have known about his wife's affair before he was killed. This added another layer of tragedy to the case. Not only was Ryan betrayed by his wife's adultery, but he may have discovered that betrayal shortly before losing his life because of it. The ballistics evidence was equally important, showing the trajectory of the bullets and the close range at which the shots were fired. This evidence supported the prosecution's theory that the murder was committed by someone who could get close to Ryan without raising alarm. Someone he trusted, someone he would never suspect of wanting to harm him. The physical evidence from the crime scene painted a picture of a murder that was both intimate and brutal. The close range of the shots, the precision with which they were delivered, and the domestic setting all combined to create a portrait of ultimate betrayal. So after several hours of deliberation, the Lynn County jury reached their verdict on July 11, 2025. They found Karina Sue Cooper guilty of first-degree murder in the death of her husband Ryan Cooper. The verdict came just after 5 p.m. on a Friday, nearly 4 years after Ryan's death and over a year since Karina's arrest. The conviction carried with it a mandatory sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Karina, now 48 years old, this meant she would spend the remainder of her life behind bars, paying for the crime that had shattered her family and traumatized her community. The sentencing hearing would provide an opportunity for Ryan's family to speak about the impact of his loss. His sister Michelle Wilson spoke about how the crime was committed in their home while 3 of the children slept upstairs, emphasizing the particular horror of violence perpetrated in what should have been a safe family space. Ryan's family members spoke of their determination to keep his memory alive, to ensure that he would not be forgotten in the wake of the sensational aspects of his murder. They spoke of him as a father, a farmer, and a friend, roles that defined who he was far more than the violent circumstances of his death. While Karina Cooper's trial concluded with her conviction, the story was not yet complete. Houston Danker, the man accused of conspiring with Karina to murder Ryan, still faced his own day in court. His trial was scheduled for August 12, 2025, in Johnson County District Court in Iowa City. Danker's case had been postponed multiple times due to defense motions and scheduling conflicts, but the legal system's patience was not unlimited. Eventually, he too would face a jury, an answer for his alleged role in Ryan Cooper's murder. The prosecution's case against Danker would likely follow similar lines to the case against Karina, that the two had conspired together to eliminate Ryan, so they could be together without the impediment of Karina's marriage. The challenge would be proving Danker's specific role in the conspiracy and his level of involvement in the actual murder. For the Cooper family and the community of Traer, Danker's trial would represent the final chapter in the legal proceedings stemming from Ryan's death. Only when both conspirators had been held accountable could there be a sense that justice had truly been served. Perhaps the most tragic aspect of the Ryan Cooper murder case is the impact on the children who lost both parents in a single night. When Ryan was murdered, they lost their father to violence. When Karina was arrested, tried, and convicted, they effectively lost their mother to the consequences of her actions. These children, who had been sleeping peacefully upstairs while their father was being murdered in the living room below, would have to carry the trauma of that night for the rest of their lives. They would have to process not only the loss of their father, but the knowledge that their mother was responsible for that loss. The children's experience represents one of the most heartbreaking aspects of domestic violence cases involving murder. They become collateral damage in conflicts they had no part in creating, victims of decisions made by adults who should have been protecting them rather than destroying their family. The Cooper children would now face the challenge of rebuilding their lives without either parent, relying on extended family members and community support to help them navigate their grief and trauma. Their story serves as a reminder that the victims of murder extend far beyond the person who loses their life. Entire families and communities are damaged by these acts of violence. The small town of Traer, Iowa, was forever changed by the Ryan Cooper murder. In communities where violent crime is rare, a case like this reverberates through every aspect of daily life. People who had once felt secure in their homes and confident in their neighbors began to question those assumptions. The case also highlighted the hidden tensions that can exist even in the most seemingly peaceful communities. The affair between Karina and Houston, the whispered conversations about shooting someone in the face, the gradual breakdown of a marriage. All of these elements had been present in Traer without most residents being fully aware of how dangerous the situation had become. In the aftermath of the murder and the subsequent trials, the community would have to confront some difficult truths about domestic violence, marital infidelity, and the warning signs that might have been missed. While it's impossible to know whether intervention could have prevented Ryan's murder, the case served as a stark reminder that tragedy can strike anywhere, even in the heart of America's farmland. The murder of Ryan Cooper offers several sobering lessons about the nature of domestic violence and the escalation that can occur when infidelity intersects with other forms of relationship dysfunction. The case demonstrates how seemingly ordinary marital problems can spiral into deadly violence when the right combination of factors comes together. The premeditated nature of Ryan's murder distinguishes it from many domestic violence cases, which often involve spontaneous eruptions of violence during arguments or confrontations. Instead, this was a calculated crime, planned in advance by two people who had decided that murder was preferable to divorce or separation. The case also illustrates the importance of taking seriously the warning signs of potential violence. Karina's statements about wanting to shoot her husband in the face were not just angry words. They were expressions of genuine intent that her friends might have taken more seriously in hindsight. Finally, the case highlights the devastating impact that selfish decisions by adults can have on children. The Cooper children will spend the rest of their lives dealing with the consequences of choices made by their parents, choices that robbed them of their father and their mother in a single act of violence. With Karina Cooper's conviction and life sentence, a measure of justice has been served for Ryan Cooper's murder. She will spend the remainder of her life in prison, paying the ultimate legal price for her crime. When Houston Danker faces trial, there may be additional accountability for those involved in the conspiracy. But even with legal justice served, questions remain about the case. What drove two people to believe that murder was their best option? How did a marriage deteriorate to the point where a wife could plan and execute her husband's death? What warning signs might have been missed? And what could have been done differently to prevent this tragedy? These questions may never be fully answered, but they remind us that behind every true crime case are real people whose lives have been forever altered by violence. Ryan Cooper was more than just a victim. He was a father, a community member, and a human being whose life had value beyond the circumstances of his death. As this case moves from the courtroom into the history books, it's important to remember that at its center was a man named Ryan Cooper, who deserved better than the fate he received. He was 42 years old when he died, still young enough to have many years ahead of him to watch his children grow up, to contribute to his community, and to live whatever life he chose for himself. Instead, his life was cut short by the two people who should have been most committed to protecting him, his wife and her lover. The betrayal was complete and devastating, not just for Ryan, but for everyone who loved him. Ryan's family has stated that they will never stop saying his name, a commitment to ensuring that he is remembered for who he was, rather than just how he died, in a case that has generated significant media attention and public interest. This commitment to honoring Ryan's memory is both touching and important. The murder of Ryan Cooper represents one of those crimes that shake a community's sense of security and challenge our assumptions about the people we think we know. It's a reminder that the capacity for violence can exist in the most unexpected places, hidden behind facades of normalcy and respectability. As we close this chapter on the Ryan Cooper murder case, we're left with a complex mix of emotions. There is satisfaction that justice has been served, that Karina Cooper will pay for her crime with the rest of her life. There is sadness for the children who lost both parents to this tragedy. There is sympathy for a community that had to confront the reality that such violence could occur in their midst. But perhaps most of all, there is a sense of loss for Ryan Cooper himself, a man whose life was taken from him by those he trusted most, whose story serves as a tragic reminder of how quickly ordinary life can turn deadly, when selfishness and desperation override basic human decency. The quiet farms around Traer, Iowa continue their eternal cycle of planting and harvest, but the Cooper family home stands as a memorial to a crime that changed everything. In the end, that may be the most fitting tribute to Ryan Cooper, that his story continues to be told, that his death was not in vain if it helps others recognize the warning signs of domestic violence, and the importance of treasuring the relationships that matter most. Murder of Ryan Cooper reminds us that even in the most peaceful places, darkness can intrude, and that the people we trust most can sometimes be the ones who hurt us the most. Rest peacefully and remember that tomorrow brings new hope, new chances for justice, and new opportunities to protect those we love. Please, if this is your first time listening to one of our true crime stories, welcome to the channel where we explore these cases in a calm and respectful way. I also want to take a moment to appreciate my amazing subscribers who've been rocking with me. Thank you so much for your continued support. If you're still awake and listening, drop a comment. Let me know where you're tuning in from and the current time in your corner of the world, or just say something to let me know you're still here. And if you haven't already, be sure to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss our next true crime stories for sleep. Now, let's move on to our second story. Story 2. Tonight we travel to Meridian, Idaho, in the spring of 2011, where a seemingly perfect life would unravel in the most tragic of ways. This is the story of Emmett Corrigan, a promising young attorney whose secret affair would ultimately cost him his life in a Walgreens parking lot on a cold March evening. In 2010, 30-year-old Emmett Corrigan appeared to have everything a man could want. He was a rising star in the legal world, having established himself as a talented attorney in Meridian, Idaho, a growing suburb of Boise. Emmett had built his career on hard work and ambition, and his professional reputation was stellar among his colleagues and clients alike. At home, Emmett's life seemed equally blessed. He was married to his college sweetheart, Ashley, a woman who had stood by his side through law school in the early challenging years of building his practice. Together, they had created what many would consider the ideal American family. 4 beautiful children filled their home with laughter and joy, and Ashley was expecting their 5th child, adding to the sense of completeness that surrounded their household. From the outside, the Corrigans embodied success and happiness. They lived in a comfortable home, attended church regularly, and were actively involved in their community. Emmett was the kind of father who coached Little League and never missed a school play. Ashley was devoted to their children and supportive of her husband's growing career. Their friends and neighbors saw them as a couple who had it all figured out. But beneath this polished exterior, cracks were beginning to form in ways that no one could have predicted. Emmett's law practice was thriving, and with success came the need for additional help. In 2010, he made the decision to hire a paralegal to assist with the increasing workload. The position required someone detail-oriented, professional, and capable of handling the sensitive nature of legal work. Enter Candy Hall, a married mother of two who seemed perfectly suited for the role. Candy was intelligent, organized, and possessed the kind of professional demeanor that made her an asset to any legal office. She had her own family responsibilities, being married to Robert Hall, known to friends and family as Rob. The Halls had their own children, and like the Corrigans, appeared to be living a stable, middle-class life in Idaho. The working relationship between Emmett and Candy began innocently enough. She proved to be an excellent paralegal, capable of handling complex cases and managing the administrative demands of a busy legal practice. Emmett appreciated her competence and reliability, qualities that are invaluable in the legal profession where attention to detail can make or break a case. As the months passed, their professional relationship deepened into something more personal. They spent long hours working together, often staying late into the evening to meet deadlines or prepare for important cases. The boundaries between employer and employee began to blur, as they found themselves sharing more personal conversations during breaks and after-hours work sessions. What started as mutual respect and professional admiration gradually evolved into something neither of them had planned or anticipated. The long hours, the shared goals, and the natural chemistry between two intelligent, ambitious people created an environment ripe for emotional entanglement. By late 2010, Emmett and Candy's relationship had crossed the line from professional to personal. What began as lingering glances and extended conversations had transformed into a full-blown extramarital affair. Both were married, both had children, and both understood the gravity of what they were doing. Yet neither seemed able to stop. For Emmett, the affair represented something beyond mere physical attraction. Candy was intelligent, understanding of his work pressures, and provided a kind of emotional connection that he felt was missing in his marriage. The demands of being a father to 4 children, with another on the way, combined with the pressure of building a successful legal career, had created stress in his marriage that he struggled to address directly. Candy, for her part, found in Emmett a successful, charismatic man who made her feel valued and appreciated, in ways that her marriage to Rob apparently did not. The attention from her accomplished boss fed something in her that had been neglected, and the excitement of their secret relationship provided an escape from the routine of daily life. The affair was conducted with the careful planning that both their professional lives demanded. They met in hotels, took extended lunch breaks together, and found ways to spend time alone that wouldn't raise immediate suspicion. They were discreet, or so they believed, careful not to let their personal relationship affect their work environment in obvious ways. However, maintaining such a secret required an elaborate web of lies and deceptions. Emmett had to account for his whereabouts to Ashley, particularly during a time when she was pregnant and needed his support. The guilt of deceiving his pregnant wife while she prepared to bring their 5th child into the world weighed heavily on him. Yet he continued the affair. Candy faced similar challenges, having to explain her late hours and changed behavior to Rob. The strain of living a double life began to show in small ways. Mood changes, distraction, and the constant mental energy required to keep their secret. Meanwhile, Rob and Candy Hall's marriage was experiencing its own serious problems, issues that extended well beyond Candy's affair with Emmett. Their relationship had been deteriorating for some time, plagued by mutual infidelity, financial stress, and communication breakdown. Rob was not naive about his wife's affair. Whether through direct evidence, intuition, or the inevitable small signs that accompany such deceptions, he became aware that Candy was involved with another man. The knowledge that his wife was having an affair with her boss, successful attorney who could provide things Rob felt he could not, created a toxic mixture of jealousy, humiliation, and rage. The Hall marriage became a battlefield of accusations, arguments, and emotional manipulation. Both Rob and Candy had apparently been unfaithful to each other at various points in their marriage, creating a relationship built on mistrust and resentment. The foundation of their marriage had eroded to the point where they were more adversaries than partners. Rob's discovery of Candy's affair with Emmett represented more than just marital infidelity. It was a blow to his masculinity, his sense of worth, and his ability to provide for and protect his family. The fact that his wife's lover was a successful professional man made the betrayal even more painful and humiliating. As the affair continued into early 2011, the tensions in both marriages reached a breaking point. Ashley was preparing for the birth of their fifth child, blissfully unaware that her husband was living a secret life that threatened everything they had built together. Rob was becoming increasingly unstable, consumed by thoughts of his wife's betrayal and the man who had in his mind stolen her away from their family. By March 2011, the situation had become untenable for all involved. The affair between Emmett and Candy had been ongoing for months, and the strain of maintaining their secret was taking its toll on everyone. Rob's behavior had become increasingly erratic as he struggled with the knowledge of his wife's infidelity. The exact details of how events unfolded in the days leading up to March 11, 2011 remain somewhat unclear, but it's evident that tensions had reached a critical point. Rob had apparently decided that he could no longer tolerate the situation. Whether through direct confrontation with Candy, discovered evidence, or his own investigation, Rob had determined that something needed to be done about his wife's affair. The decision to confront Emmett directly represented a dangerous escalation in what had been, up to that point, a private family crisis. Rob's mental state during this period appears to have been severely compromised by the emotional trauma of his failing marriage and his wife's very public affair with a prominent member of their community. What drove Rob to seek a direct confrontation with Emmett may never be fully understood. Was it an attempt to salvage his marriage by eliminating what he saw as the primary threat? Was it simple revenge against the man he blamed for destroying his family? Or was it a desperate cry for help from a man who felt he had lost everything that mattered to him? The tragic events that would unfold on March 11 to 2011 suggest that Rob's emotional state had deteriorated to the point where he was no longer thinking rationally about the consequences of his actions. The evening of March 11, 2011 began like many others in Meridian, Idaho. Families were finishing dinner, children were completing homework, and the routine rhythms of suburban life were playing out in homes throughout the community. For 3 people, however, this night would end in tragedy that would destroy multiple families and leave a community in shock. The exact sequence of events that led to the fatal confrontation in the Walgreens parking lot remains the subject of some debate, as the primary witness, Candy Hall, provided conflicting accounts of what transpired. What is clear is that sometime after 10 p.m., a confrontation between Rob Hall and Emmett Corrigan was arranged at the Walgreens pharmacy on Eagle Road in Meridian. The choice of location, a busy commercial parking lot, suggests that perhaps one or both men believed that a public setting would prevent the situation from escalating to violence. If so, this calculation proved tragically wrong. According to the subsequent investigation, Rob had armed himself with a .20 caliber pistol before heading to the meeting. This detail alone suggests that Rob's intentions may not have been as benign as later claims would suggest. The decision to bring a loaded weapon to what was ostensibly a conversation indicates a level of premeditation that would later prove crucial to the prosecution's case. Candy was also present at the scene, though her exact role in arranging or facilitating the meeting remains unclear. Her presence would later make her the sole witness to the events that unfolded, a responsibility that would prove challenging given the traumatic nature of what she witnessed and her emotional investment in all the parties involved. The confrontation between the 2 men, one the betrayed husband, the other the successful lover, was brief but deadly. Words were exchanged, though their exact content remains unknown. What began as a conversation quickly escalated into violence that would leave one man dead and another facing decades in prison. The violence erupted suddenly in the Walgreens parking lot. According to the evidence presented at trial, Rob Hall fired 3 shots that night. 2 of those shots struck Emmett Corrigan with fatal accuracy. One bullet hit his forehead and the other struck his chest, wounds that proved immediately fatal. The sound of gunshots in a busy commercial area brought immediate attention from nearby businesses and passing motorists. Sometime after 10 p.m. that night, a 911 call reporting several shots fired at the pharmacy's parking lot meant the authorities rushed there. When first responders arrived at the scene, they found a complex and confusing situation. Emmett Corrigan was found dead at the scene. His life ended at just 30 years of age. The promising attorney, father of 4 with a 5th child on the way, lay motionless in the parking lot of a suburban pharmacy, the victim of a love triangle turned deadly. But the scene was further complicated by the discovery of Rob Hall, who was found unconscious with a gunshot wound to his head. The 3rd bullet fired that night had been aimed at Rob himself, though it had not proven fatal. Whether this was an intentional suicide attempt that failed or an accidental discharge during the struggle remains a matter of some debate. Candy Hall was found at the scene, hysterical and in shock, the sole witness to the violent end of the affair that had consumed her life for months. Her presence at the scene, combined with her emotional state, made it difficult for investigators to immediately piece together exactly what had transpired. The parking lot of the Walgreens became a crime scene, with police tape cordoning off the area as investigators began the painstaking process of reconstructing the events that had led to Emmett's death. The scene was surreal, a place where families routinely stopped to pick up prescriptions and everyday items, had become the site of a murder that would shock the entire community. The investigation into Emmett Corrigan's murder began immediately, but it was complicated by several factors that made determining the exact sequence of events challenging. The primary witness, Candy Hall, was emotionally traumatized and provided conflicting accounts of what had transpired, making it difficult for investigators to establish a clear timeline of events. As surveillance footage did not pick up the shooting, the only witness was Candy. Unfortunately, she was not a good witness, and gave conflicting statements, so it was not clear what exactly happened during those crucial moments in the parking lot. This lack of clear evidence made the case more complex than a typical murder investigation. Rob Hall's condition further complicated the investigation. He had been found unconscious with a head wound and claimed to have no memory of the events of that night. Whether this amnesia was genuine or convenient became a matter of significant debate during the subsequent legal proceedings. As investigators delved deeper into the case, the full scope of the love triangle that had led to the shooting began to emerge. The affair between Emmett and Candy became public knowledge, shocking both their families and the broader community. The revelation that a respected attorney had been carrying on an extramarital affair with his paralegal while his wife was pregnant added layers of complexity to an already tragic situation. The investigation revealed that Corrigan had hired Candy as a paralegal back in 2010, establishing the timeline of their professional relationship and its evolution into something more personal. This professional connection would become crucial in understanding how the affair had developed and why it had ultimately led to such devastating consequences. Detectives had to piece together not just the events of March 11, 2011, but also the months of deception, passion, and growing tension that had led to that fatal confrontation. They interviewed friends, family members, and colleagues of all three individuals involved, gradually building a picture of the complex relationships that had culminated in murder. The case against Robert Hall was built on the prosecution's theory that he had deliberately murdered Emmett Corrigan in a premeditated act of revenge. The prosecutors didn't believe it was self-defense. With further investigation and Candy's statements, it was revealed that Robert fired 2 shots at Emmett and tried to take his own life with the 3rd bullet, which missed his skull. The prosecution argued that Rob's decision to bring a gun to the meeting, combined with the precision of the shots that killed Emmett, demonstrated clear intent to commit murder. They contended that this was not a crime of passion or self-defense, but rather a calculated act of revenge by a man who could not accept his wife's affair. Rob's defense team, however, argued that their client had acted in self-defense and that any memory loss regarding the events was genuine due to the head trauma he had sustained. They claimed that the confrontation had escalated unexpectedly and that Rob had fired in fear for his own safety. The trial became a highly publicized event in Idaho, drawing attention not just for the violent nature of the crime, but for the scandal of the affair that had precipitated it. The courtroom was packed with family members, friends, and community members, who struggled to understand how such a tragedy could have unfolded among people they thought they knew. After a high-profile trial spanning 2 weeks, jurors found Robert Hall guilty of second-degree murder. The jury rejected the self-defense argument, concluding that the evidence supported the prosecution's theory that Rob had deliberately killed Emmett Corrigan. In 2012, Rob was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 30 years. He is eligible for parole in 2028. The sentence reflected the serious nature of his crime while acknowledging that this was not a first-degree murder, with premeditation beyond a reasonable doubt. The murder of Emmett Corrigan sent shockwaves through the Meridian community and beyond. The revelation of the affair and its violent conclusion destroyed multiple families and left lasting scars on everyone involved. For Ashley Corrigan, the tragedy was compounded by the dual betrayal of her husband's death and the discovery of his affair. Ashley Harmon's 5th child was just 6 weeks old when her husband Emmett Corrigan was gunned down in the parking lot of a pharmacy in 20. She was left to raise 5 children alone while grappling with the complex emotions of grief, betrayal, and anger. The children lost their father at young ages, and they would grow up knowing not just that he had been murdered, but that he had died because of his own choices and actions. The legacy Emmett left behind was complicated by the circumstances of his death. making the grieving process even more difficult for his family. Candy Hall faced her own set of consequences. Her marriage to Rob was effectively over, though the legal proceedings kept them connected through the complex web of testimony and legal requirements. She had to live with the knowledge that her affair had directly led to Emmett's death and Rob's imprisonment. The weight of being the catalyst for such destruction must have been overwhelming. The Hall children, like the Corrigan children, became innocent victims of the adult decisions that had led to tragedy. They lost their father to prison and faced the stigma of being associated with a murder case that had garnered significant media attention. The murder of Emmett Corrigan serves as a stark reminder of how personal choices can have devastating consequences that extend far beyond the individuals directly involved. What began as an extramarital affair between two consenting adults escalated into a situation that destroyed multiple families and left children without fathers. The case highlights the complex emotions and motivations that drive people to make decisions that seem incomprehensible to others. Rob Hall's decision to confront Emmett with a loaded weapon represented the culmination of months of emotional turmoil, feelings of inadequacy, and the humiliation of being betrayed by his wife with a man he perceived as more successful than himself. Emmett's decision to engage in the affair, while his wife was pregnant with their fifth child, demonstrated how even intelligent, successful people can make choices that put everything they value at risk. The temporary excitement of the forbidden relationship cost him his life and left his children without a father. Candy's role in the tragedy is perhaps the most complex. As the woman at the center of the love triangle, she bore witness to the violent end of relationships that had defined her life. Her conflicting statements to police suggest the psychological trauma of watching two men she cared about destroy each other because of their involvement with her. The Corrigan murder case had a lasting impact on the Meridian community and the broader legal community in Idaho. The revelation that a respected attorney had been killed because of an extramarital affair shocked many who thought they knew Emmett personally and professionally. The case served as a cautionary tale about the hidden complexities and seemingly perfect lives. The Corrigans had appeared to be the ideal family, successful, religious, involved in their community, yet beneath the surface were problems significant enough to lead to infidelity and ultimately murder. For the legal community, the case was particularly troubling because it involved the murder of one of their own in circumstances that reflected poorly on professional ethics and personal conduct. The affair between an attorney and his paralegal raised questions about workplace relationships and the potential for abuse of power dynamics. The media coverage of the case was extensive, with many outlets focusing on the salacious details of the affair and the dramatic circumstances of the murder. This attention brought unwanted scrutiny to all the families involved and made their private tragedy a matter of public consumption. The tragic story of Emmett Corrigan's murder offers several sobering lessons about the consequences of personal choices and the importance of addressing relationship problems before they escalate to violence. The affair that led to Emmett's death might have been prevented if he had addressed the problems in his marriage directly rather than seeking fulfillment outside of it. Marriage counseling, the honest communication with his wife, or even the difficult decision to end his marriage might have prevented the tragic chain of events that followed. Rob Hall's decision to confront Emmett with violence, rather than addressing his marital problems through legal or therapeutic means, transformed him from a victim of adultery into a convicted murderer. His inability to cope with his wife's betrayal in a constructive way not only cost Emmett his life, but also destroyed Rob's own future and his children's lives. The case also highlights the importance of workplace boundaries and professional ethics. The relationship between Emmett and Candy began in a professional context, where power dynamics and close working conditions created an environment conducive to inappropriate personal involvement. Years after the murder, the consequences continue to ripple through the lives of everyone affected by the tragedy. To this day, he maintains that he has no recollection of the night Emmett was killed. Rob Hall remains in prison, serving his 30-year sentence. His claim of amnesia regarding the events of March 11, 2011, has never been conclusively proven or disproven. The children from both families have grown up in the shadow of this tragedy. The Corrigan children have had to navigate their teenage and young adult years without their father, while also grappling with the complex legacy he left behind. The Hall children have had to live with the knowledge that their father is a convicted murderer and that their family was destroyed by their parents' choices. Ashley Corrigan has had to rebuild her life as a single mother of 5, dealing not only with the practical challenges of raising children alone, but also with the emotional complexity of her husband's betrayal and murder. Her strength in moving forward while honoring her children's need to understand their father's story has been remarkable. The broader community has also had to process the lessons from this tragedy. The case has been featured in numerous true crime programs and podcasts, ensuring that the story continues to serve as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked passion and unresolved conflict. As we conclude this tragic story, it's important to remember that the murder of Emmett Corrigan was not an inevitable result of an extramarital affair. Many relationships face infidelity without resorting to violence. What made this case different was the combination of personal choices, emotional instability, and the decision to resolve conflict through violence rather than through legal or therapeutic means. The story serves as a reminder that our choices have consequences not just for ourselves, but for everyone we care about. Emmett's decision to have an affair affected not just his marriage, but ultimately led to his death and left his children without a father. Rob's decision to confront his wife's lover with a gun transformed him from a victim into a perpetrator and destroyed his own family in the process. Perhaps most tragically, the children involved in this case, both the Corrigan and Hall children, paid the highest price for choices they had no part in making. Their lives were forever altered by the adult decisions that led to that fatal night in a Walgreens parking lot. The murder of Emmett Corrigan remains a stark reminder of how quickly life can change and how the choices we make in moments of passion or despair can have consequences that last forever. It's a story that continues to resonate because it involves ordinary people making extraordinary bad decisions that led to irreversible tragedy. In the quiet suburbs of Meridian, Idaho, life has moved on, but the lessons from that March night in 2011 remain relevant. The Walgreens where Emmett died continues to serve the community, but for those who remember, it stands as a monument to the devastating consequences of unchecked passion and unresolved conflict. This has been the story of Emmett Corrigan, a man whose life ended too soon because of choices that seemed manageable until they weren't. May his story serve as a reminder that our personal decisions have far-reaching consequences, and that seeking help for our problems is always preferable to letting them escalate to the point of no return. Please, if you're enjoying these stories, don't forget to leave a comment. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. And if you haven't already, be sure to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss the next true crime story for sleep. Now let's move on to our third story. Story 3. In the affluent neighborhood of Woodland Hills, nestled in the San Fernando Valley of Los Angeles, the morning of January 23, 2017, began like any other. The palm-lined streets were quiet. Expensive cars sat in manicured driveways, and behind the gates of million-dollar homes, successful people prepared for another day in the entertainment capital of the world. But behind the facade of one particular Spanish-style mansion, a carefully orchestrated plan was about to unfold, one that would shatter the life of a beloved celebrity hairstylist and expose a web of deception, forbidden love, and cold-blooded murder. Fabio Cementilli was living what many would consider the American dream. At 57 years old, he had built an empire in the world of high-end hairstyling, becoming the go-to artist for Hollywood's elite. His client list read like a who's who of the entertainment industry. Celebrities trusted him with their most important looks for red carpet events, award shows, and magazine covers. Fabio wasn't just successful professionally, he was beloved by everyone who knew him. Colleagues described him as generous, warm-hearted, and genuinely passionate about his craft. He had that rare combination of artistic talent and business acumen that allowed him to build multiple successful salons across Los Angeles. At home, Fabio seemed equally blessed. He lived in a beautiful Woodland Hills estate with his wife of many years, Monica Cementilli. To the outside world, they appeared to be the perfect couple, successful, attractive, living the California dream. Monica, an elegant woman in her late 40s, seemed to enjoy the lifestyle that Fabio's success had provided. They had built what appeared to be a solid life together, complete with the trappings of upper-class Los Angeles living. But as we so often discover in these stories, appearances can be devastatingly deceiving. On that January morning, Monica had plans to meet a friend for coffee. It was a routine social engagement, the kind that filled the calendars of affluent housewives throughout Los Angeles. She kissed Fabio goodbye just as she had done countless times before, and drove away from their Woodland Hills home. Fabio, meanwhile, had decided to enjoy a quiet morning at home. He made his way to the backyard patio, a peaceful spot where he often liked to sit and enjoy his coffee while looking out over their well-maintained garden. The patio was his sanctuary, a place where he could relax and prepare mentally for another busy day at the salon. The morning air was crisp, typical for January in Southern California. Birds chirped in the nearby trees, and the distant hum of traffic on the 101 freeway provided the usual background soundtrack of Los Angeles life. It was peaceful, serene, exactly the kind of morning that made living in Woodland Hills so desirable. Fabio settled into his usual spot. Perhaps scrolling through his phone or simply enjoying the quiet moments before his day would inevitably become filled with the controlled chaos of running multiple businesses. He had no reason to feel anxious or concerned. After all, he was in his own backyard, in his own neighborhood, surrounded by the security that his success had purchased. But someone was watching. Someone who had been planning this moment for months. What happened next was swift and savage. A figure emerged from the shadows of the garden. Someone who had been waiting. Someone who knew Fabio's routines. Someone who had planned this attack with meticulous precision. Fabio Cementilli was stabbed multiple times as he sat on his patio, suffering wounds to his neck, face, and chest in what police would later describe as an extremely gruesome and bloody scene. The attack was not random, it was not the work of a desperate burglar or a crime of passion. The violence was focused, deliberate, and carried out with a level of brutality that suggested deep personal motivation. After the horrific assault, the killer made sure to take Fabio's prized red Porsche. The Porsche was later found abandoned miles away, with droplets of blood on the inside. The theft of the car served a dual purpose. It provided the killer with an escape vehicle and initially made the crime look like a robbery gone wrong. When Monica returned home later that morning, she discovered a scene that would haunt her for the rest of her life, or so it would seem to anyone watching her reaction. She called 911, her voice filled with what sounded like genuine shock and grief. The responding officers found exactly what Monica had reported. Fabio's lifeless body on the patio, surrounded by evidence of a violent struggle. The brutality of the scene was immediately apparent, and investigators knew they were dealing with something far more sinister than a simple home invasion. At first, police thought Fabio Cementilli was killed during a robbery. The missing Porsche seemed to support this theory, and robbery murders, while tragic, were not unheard of in affluent Los Angeles neighborhoods. The initial investigation followed standard protocols for such cases: canvassing the neighborhood, checking for witnesses, examining physical evidence, and looking for any surveillance footage that might have captured the perpetrator's escape. But experienced detectives know that first impressions can be misleading. And something about this case didn't sit quite right. The level of violence seemed excessive for a simple robbery. The attack appeared personal, intimate in its brutality. There were small details that began to nag at the investigators. Inconsistencies that would eventually unravel a conspiracy far more complex than anyone initially imagined. In the immediate aftermath of Fabio's murder, Monica played the role of the devastated widow perfectly. She spoke to police with what appeared to be genuine grief, cooperating with their initial questions, and providing them with basic information about her husband's life and business dealings. To friends and family, Monica seemed utterly shattered by the loss. She accepted condolences with grace, made funeral arrangements with the kind of attention to detail that suggested she wanted to honor her husband's memory properly, and spoke movingly about the man she had lost. The funeral was well attended, a testament to how beloved Fabio had been in both his professional and personal circles. Colleagues from the hairstyling world, clients who had become friends, and neighbors who had known the couple for years, all came to pay their respects. Monica stood at the center of it all, accepting hugs and words of comfort, the picture of a woman trying to hold herself together in the face of an unimaginable tragedy. But even as Monica grieved publicly, detectives were working quietly in the background, following leads and examining evidence. They were methodical, patient, and thorough, qualities that would prove essential as the true story began to emerge. As weeks passed, the investigation took on a more focused direction. Detectives had been examining Fabio's financial records, business relationships, and personal life, looking for any enemies or conflicts that might explain such a violent attack. What they discovered was surprising. Fabio Cementilli appeared to be exactly what he seemed, a successful businessman who was well liked by virtually everyone who knew him. He had no known enemies, no business disputes that had turned ugly, no gambling debts or other financial troubles that might have made him a target. This lack of obvious motives actually made the case more intriguing to investigators. In their experience, when a successful person is murdered with such brutality, there's usually a clear reason: money, revenge, jealousy, or some other powerful emotion that drives someone to kill. The breakthrough came when detectives decided to take a much closer look at Monica herself. While she had been cooperative during the initial investigation, they began to examine her movements, her relationships, and her own financial situation more carefully. What they discovered would transform the entire case. Monica Cementilli was living a double life. While she appeared to be the devoted wife of a successful businessman, she had been conducting a clandestine affair that had been going on for months before Fabio's murder. The object of her affection was Robert Baker, a man whose background was as complicated as the relationship they had developed. Baker was someone who existed on the margins of society, someone who had struggled with the law and was far removed from the affluent world that Monica inhabited with Fabio. According to the indictment, Monica Cementilli and Robert Baker had been having an ongoing affair and conspired to kill Fabio so the couple could be together and collect life insurance money. The relationship between Monica and Baker was passionate, intense, and ultimately deadly. It wasn't simply a casual affair or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a deep emotional connection that had grown into something that Monica was willing to kill for. But it wasn't just about love. There was also a significant financial motive that made Fabio's death attractive to both Monica and her lover. Fabio had been successful enough to carry substantial life insurance policies, and Monica stood to inherit not just those policies but also his business interests and their considerable shared assets. The combination of forbidden love and financial gain created a powerful motive for murder, but it also required careful planning and execution. Monica and Baker weren't dealing with a random victim. They were planning to kill someone whose death would be thoroughly investigated, someone whose murder would automatically make his spouse a person of interest. The conspiracy to kill Fabio Cementilli was not a spur-of-the-moment decision. Evidence would later show that Monica and Baker had been planning the murder for months, working out details and waiting for the right opportunity. Monica's role in the conspiracy was crucial. As Fabio's wife, she had access to information that Baker needed. Fabio's daily routines, when he would be alone at the house, the layout of their property, and the security measures that were in place. The plan they developed was designed to make the murder look like a robbery. Baker would wait until Monica had left the house, then attack Fabio and steal his Porsche. The theft of the expensive car would provide misdirection for investigators, making them initially focus on the possibility that Fabio had been killed during a robbery rather than looking immediately at personal motives. But the level of violence in the attack would eventually work against them. The savage nature of the stabbing suggested personal hatred rather than the clinical efficiency typically associated with robbery murders. A professional robber would likely have used a gun or would have inflicted only the minimum violence necessary to subdue their victim. The multiple stab wounds to Fabio's face, neck, and chest suggested someone who wanted him not just dead, but who took pleasure in his suffering. As the investigation progressed, detectives began to uncover a web of evidence that pointed directly at Monica and her lover. Phone records showed extensive communication between them in the weeks leading up to the murder. Financial records revealed Monica's knowledge of Fabio's insurance policies and her potential financial gain from his death. But perhaps most damaging was the physical evidence that tied Baker directly to the crime scene. Detectives found DNA evidence, and Monica tried to explain it away by telling them that she had hit and injured Robert Baker while playing racquetball, and his DNA had transferred to a towel that she brought home from the gym. This explanation was creative but ultimately unconvincing. The forensic evidence was too substantial and too specifically located to be explained away by such an innocent scenario. The DNA evidence, combined with the circumstantial evidence of motive and opportunity, began to build a compelling case against both Monica and Baker. On June 14, 2017, Baker and Monica were arrested and ultimately indicted for Fabio's murder and conspiracy to commit murder. The arrests came after months of careful investigation, during which detectives had built what they believed to be an airtight case against both conspirators. The news of Monica's arrest shocked everyone who knew the couple. Friends and neighbors had no idea that Monica had been living a secret life, or that she might have been capable of orchestrating her husband's murder. The woman who had seemed so devastated by her loss, who had accepted condolences with such apparent grace, had actually been the architect of the very tragedy that had supposedly destroyed her world. The arrest also revealed the existence of Robert Baker and the affair that had been the catalyst for the entire conspiracy. People who had known Monica for years were forced to confront the reality that they had never really known her at all. The case became even more complex when investigators discovered that Baker had not acted alone in the actual murder. Christopher Austin, who was working as a parole and probation officer dealing with at-risk youths in Oregon at the time of his arrest, was also involved in the killing. Austin's involvement added another layer of tragedy to the case. Here was a man whose professional life was dedicated to helping troubled young people get their lives back on track, but who had become involved in a brutal murder conspiracy. The contradiction between his public service role and his criminal actions made the case even more shocking to those following it. The presence of multiple perpetrators also explained some aspects of the crime that had puzzled investigators. The level of violence and the efficiency with which the murder was carried out suggested more than one person had been involved in the planning and execution. Austin's eventual cooperation with prosecutors would prove crucial in building the case against Monica. Austin served as a key prosecution witness in the trial of Monica, providing insider details about how the conspiracy had been planned and carried out. The legal proceedings stretched over several years, with various defendants taking different approaches to their defense. Baker pleaded no contest in July 2023, accepting a life sentence without parole. His decision to accept responsibility and cooperate with prosecutors eliminated one layer of complexity from the case. Christopher Austin pleaded no contest to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. His cooperation and lesser role in the actual planning of the murder earned him a somewhat more lenient sentence than the main conspirators. Monica, however, chose to fight the charges. She maintained her innocence and went to trial, forcing prosecutors to present their evidence in detail, and allowing the public to hear the full story of the conspiracy for the first time. The trial of Monica Cementilli was a lengthy affair that captured public attention throughout Los Angeles. Following a 10-week-long trial, jurors found Monica Cementilli guilty of one count of murder, with special circumstance allegations that the killing was carried out for financial gain and by means of lying in wait, as well as one count of conspiracy to commit murder. During the trial, prosecutors painted a picture of a woman who had been living a secret life while married to Fabio, conducting an affair that had evolved into a murder conspiracy. They presented evidence of her financial motives, showing how much she stood to gain from her husband's death through insurance policies and inheritance. The defense tried to argue that Monica had not been involved in planning the murder, suggesting instead that Baker and Austin had acted without her knowledge or involvement. They portrayed her as another victim of the tragedy, someone who had been betrayed both by her lover and by the legal system that was now trying to convict her. But the evidence was overwhelming. Phone records, DNA evidence, financial records, and witness testimony all pointed to Monica's central role in planning her husband's death. The jury deliberated carefully but ultimately concluded that the prosecution had proven their case beyond a reasonable doubt. Monica Cementilli was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for orchestrating the 2017 murder of her husband, renowned hairdresser Fabio Cementilli. The sentence reflected both the severity of the crime and the special circumstances that had made it eligible for the harshest possible punishment. The life sentence without parole meant that Monica would spend the rest of her natural life in prison, never again experiencing the freedom or luxury that she had enjoyed during her years with Fabio. The woman who had been willing to kill for money and love would now have neither. For the Cementilli family, the verdict provided a measure of justice, but could never truly compensate for the loss they had suffered. Fabio's death had robbed them not just of a beloved family member, but of someone who had been a positive force in the lives of countless people throughout his career. The case of Monica Cementilli serves as a stark reminder of how deception can lurk behind even the most seemingly perfect facades. The affluent neighborhood, the successful marriage, the loving wife, all of it had been a carefully maintained illusion hiding a much darker reality. Monica had been obsessed with her family not finding out, with anybody not finding out about her affair. This obsession with maintaining appearances had ultimately led her down a path that destroyed not just her own life, but the life of the man who had trusted her completely. The case also highlighted the devastating ripple effects of such crimes. Fabio's clients lost a talented artist who had helped them look their best during important moments in their careers. His employees lost jobs when his salons eventually closed. His friends and family lost someone who had brought joy and creativity into their lives. The investigation had revealed the methodical nature of the conspiracy, showing how Monica and her co-conspirators had planned every detail of the murder, while maintaining the pretense of normalcy in their daily lives. The ability to compartmentalize such dark intentions while going about routine activities speaks to a level of deception that most people find incomprehensible. The Monica Cementilli case demonstrates both the strengths and limitations of the criminal justice system. On one hand, patient detective work eventually uncovered the truth despite the conspirators' efforts to make the murder look like a random robbery. Forensic evidence, financial analysis, and careful investigation of personal relationships all combined to reveal what had really happened on that January morning in Woodland Hills. The case also shows how modern investigative techniques, DNA analysis, cell phone records, financial tracking, can piece together complex conspiracies even when the perpetrators have tried to cover their tracks. Monica and her co-conspirators had planned carefully, but they had underestimated the thoroughness of modern criminal investigation. At the same time, the case raises questions about what drives seemingly ordinary people to commit extraordinary crimes. Monica had been living a comfortable life with a successful husband, but she had been willing to throw it all away for an affair and the promise of even more money. The psychology behind such decisions remains difficult for most people to understand. Beyond the legal proceedings and criminal justice aspects, the Monica Cementilli case represents a profound human tragedy. Fabio Cementilli had worked hard to build a successful career in what he believed was a loving marriage. He had trusted his wife completely, never suspecting that she was capable of plotting his death. The betrayal was absolute and devastating. Monica had not simply been unfaithful. She had been planning his murder while continuing to share his bed, eat meals with him, and maintain the pretense of their marriage. The level of deception required to carry out such a conspiracy over months is almost incomprehensible to most people. For Fabio's friends, family, and colleagues, the revelation of Monica's involvement added another layer of trauma to their grief. They had to grapple not just with the loss of someone they loved, but with the knowledge that he had been killed by the person he trusted most. The case of Monica Cementilli offers several sobering lessons about human nature and the potential for deception in even our closest relationships. It shows how financial motives and illicit passion can combine to create deadly conspiracies. It demonstrates how people can maintain elaborate deceptions while planning the most heinous crimes. And it reminds us that sometimes the greatest dangers come not from strangers, but from those we trust most completely. The investigation that eventually brought Monica to justice required patience, skill, and attention to detail. It showed how modern forensic science and investigative techniques can eventually uncover even the most carefully planned crimes. But it also demonstrated the human cost of such investigations. The months and years required to seek justice, the trauma inflicted on families and communities, and the irreversible loss that no conviction can ever truly address. As we reflect on this case, we're reminded of the fragility of trust and the devastating consequences when it's betrayed in the most ultimate way possible. Monica Cementilli will spend the rest of her life in prison, paying for her choices on that January morning when greed and deception led to murder. But for those who loved Fabio Cementilli, the sentence can only provide a measure of justice. It can never bring back the man whose life was cut short by someone who should have protected him. The wealthy neighborhood of Woodland Hills has returned to its quiet normalcy. The Spanish-style house where the tragedy occurred has likely been sold to new owners who will never know its history. And life has moved on, but the memory of Fabio Cementilli, the talented hairstylist, the successful businessman, the man who trusted completely and paid for that trust with his life, serves as a reminder that even in the most seemingly perfect lives, darkness can lurk just beneath the surface. In the end, the case of Monica Cementilli stands as a testament to the dedication of investigators who refuse to let complicated crimes go unsolved, the persistence of prosecutors who seek justice for victims who can no longer speak for themselves, and the importance of remembering those whose lives are cut short by the actions of others. Justice was served, but at a cost that can never truly be calculated. Please, I'm just putting it out there. If you're still awake and listening, drop a comment. Let me know where you're tuning in from, the time in your part of the world, or just say something to let me know you're still with me. And of course, if you haven't already, like this video and subscribe so you don't miss the next true crime story for sleep. Now, let's move on to our fourth story. Story 4. Tonight, we journey back to the winter of 1989, to a quiet residential neighborhood in Mansfield, Ohio, where the American dream was about to shatter in the most unimaginable way. This is the story of Noreen Marie Boyle, a devoted mother who paid the ultimate price for standing in the way of her husband's new life. It's a tale of deception, betrayal, and a crime so calculated that it would shock even seasoned investigators. So as we settle in, we'll explore the final days of a woman who never saw it coming, and the 11-year-old boy whose testimony would help bring her killer to justice. In 1989, Dr. John Francis Boyle, Jr. appeared to have everything a man could want. Born on May 1st, 1943, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Jack Boyle had climbed every rung of the ladder to success. A University of Pennsylvania graduate, he had established himself as a respected physician in the tight-knit community of Mansfield, Ohio. His medical practice flourished, his reputation was sterling, and his future seemed boundless. But behind the carefully constructed facade of professional achievement lay a man whose personal life was crumbling. Jack Boyle was married to Noreen Marie Schmid Boyle, a woman who had dedicated her life to their family. Born in 1945, Noreen was 44 years old in 1989, a mother who had spent her adult years supporting her husband's career while raising their 2 children. The Boyle family lived in what many would consider the perfect suburban home. Their residence on a quiet street in Mansfield represented everything that middle-class families aspired to achieve. The house was well maintained, the neighborhood was safe, and their children, 11-year-old Collier and his younger sister Elizabeth, seemed to be thriving in their stable environment. Yet beneath this veneer of domestic tranquility, serious cracks had begun to appear in the Boyle marriage. Jack had grown distant from Noreen, and those closest to the couple began to notice subtle changes in their dynamic. What they couldn't see was that Dr. John Boyle had already mentally checked out of his marriage and was actively planning a new life with someone else entirely. As 1989 progressed, Jack Boyle's attention had become increasingly focused on a woman named Sherry Campbell. This wasn't merely a casual affair or a momentary lapse in judgment. Jack had fallen deeply for Sherry, and his feelings for her had grown into something that consumed his thoughts and influenced his decisions in ways that would prove catastrophic. The relationship with Sherry represented more than just romantic attraction for Jack. It symbolized freedom from the responsibilities and constraints of his current life. In Sherry, he saw the possibility of starting over, of becoming the man he believed he was meant to be, unburdened by the complications of his existing family obligations. But there was a significant obstacle to this fantasy. Noreen Boyle was not going to simply disappear from his life. As Jack's wife of many years and the mother of his children, Noreen had legal rights and legitimate claims to the life they had built together. She had supported his education, his career, and his ambitions. Any divorce would necessarily involve complex negotiations about property, custody, and financial support. For a man who had spent his adult life solving problems through careful planning and methodical execution, the messy realities of divorce represented an unacceptable complication. Jack began to consider alternative solutions that would allow him to start his new life with Sherry without the inconveniences that a traditional divorce would entail. In what would later be recognized as one of the most chilling examples of premeditated murder, Jack Boyle began making preparations for his crime months before he carried it out. One of his most significant moves was the purchase of a house in Erie, Pennsylvania, approximately 75 miles from their home in Mansfield. To anyone who knew about the purchase, the Erie house seemed like a reasonable investment or perhaps a vacation home. Jack told people that he and Sherry were planning to move there together, starting fresh in a new community where they could build their life without the complications and judgments that might follow them in Ohio. But investigators would later conclude that Jack bought the house with a much darker purpose in mind. The timing of the purchase, combined with other evidence that would emerge during the investigation, suggested that Jack had already decided to kill Noreen and was methodically planning every detail of the crime, including where he would dispose of her body. The basement of the Erie house would become central to Jack's plan. It was private, isolated, and provided him with the perfect location to conceal evidence of his crime. But what made this location particularly sinister was that Jack intended to literally bury the past beneath the foundation of his new life, with Sherry. As 1989 drew to a close, the Boyle marriage had deteriorated to the point where divorce seemed inevitable. Noreen had become increasingly aware that her husband's feelings toward her had changed, and she was preparing to protect herself and her children through legal channels. It was during this period that Noreen made a statement that would later prove to be tragically prophetic. While sitting in the parking lot of a Bob Evans restaurant with her 11-year-old son Collier, just 1 month before her death, Noreen looked at her child and said words that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "If anything happens to me, your father did it." This wasn't said in anger or as part of a dramatic argument. According to those who heard about it later, Noreen spoke these words calmly, as if she were providing important information that might someday be needed. Whether she truly believed her husband was capable of murder, or was simply expressing her fears about their deteriorating relationship, Her words would prove to be devastatingly accurate. The fact that Noreen felt compelled to share this concern with her young son suggests that she had begun to sense something dangerous in her husband's behavior. Perhaps she had noticed changes in his demeanor, or perhaps she had intuitive concerns about how far he might go to free himself from their marriage. December 30th, 1989 was supposed to be a time of family celebration. Jack's mother, Christine Boyle, had arrived at the family home in Mansfield to spend the New Year's holiday with her son, daughter-in-law, and grandchildren. The presence of extended family should have created an atmosphere of warmth and togetherness, but instead it provided Jack with the perfect cover for his crime. The evening of December 30th passed quietly, with the family settling in for the night. Christine was staying in the guest room. The children were in their bedrooms, and Jack and Noreen retired to their room as they had done countless times before. Nothing about the evening seemed particularly unusual or threatening, but as the clock moved past midnight and December 31st, 1989 began, the quiet suburban home became the scene of a brutal murder. 11-year-old Collier was sleeping in his bedroom when he was awakened by sounds that no child should ever have to hear. First came a scream, a sound so disturbing that it jolted him from sleep and filled him with immediate dread. Then came the sound of two distinct thuds, impacts that seemed to shake the house itself. The boy lay in his bed, his heart racing, trying to process what he had heard. In those terrible moments, as silence returned to the house, young Collier couldn't have known that he had just witnessed the final moments of his mother's life. What happened in the master bedroom of the Boyle home during those early morning hours of December 31st, 1989, was both brutal and methodical, based on the evidence that investigators would later uncover. Jack Boyle attacked his wife with a hammer, striking her in the head with enough force to cause severe trauma. But the hammer blow wasn't enough to kill Noreen immediately, and Jack couldn't risk her surviving to tell anyone what had happened. In what prosecutors would later describe as an act of cold-blooded calculation, he placed a plastic bag over her head and suffocated her, ensuring that there would be no possibility of her survival. The crime scene would later reveal the level of planning that had gone into the murder. Jack had prepared for this moment, gathering the materials he would need, and choosing a method that he believed would allow him to dispose of the evidence effectively. After killing Noreen, Jack wrapped her body in a green tarp, as if he were preparing to transport cargo, rather than concealing the remains of the woman who had shared his life for years. Every action he took demonstrated a chilling lack of emotion, and a focus on practical concerns rather than any sense of remorse or horror at what he had done. The house that night held a grandmother sleeping peacefully in the guest room, two children traumatized by sounds they couldn't fully understand, and a killer methodically preparing to dispose of his wife's body. When dawn broke on December 31st, 1989, the Boyle household awoke to a new reality. Christine Boyle, Jack's mother, had no idea that a murder had taken place just down the hall from where she slept. The children were confused and frightened by what they had heard during the night, but they were still too young to fully comprehend the magnitude of what had occurred. Jack, meanwhile, was already putting the next phase of his plan into action. When young Collier asked about the sounds he had heard and wondered where his mother was, Jack provided an explanation that was both simple and devastating in its callousness. He told his son that Noreen had left on a vacation for an 11-year-old boy who had heard his mother scream and then disappear. This explanation was both confusing and deeply troubling. Why would his mother leave without saying goodbye? Why would she go on vacation during the holidays when family was visiting? And why did his father seem so calm about her sudden departure? But Jack's plan required that everyone believe Noreen had left voluntarily, at least until he could dispose of her body and establish an alibi that would hold up under scrutiny. He needed time to drive to Erie, Pennsylvania, and complete the ghastly work he had planned. With Noreen's body wrapped in the green tarp and loaded into his vehicle, Jack Boyle began the 1,795-mile journey to Erie, Pennsylvania. This drive, which should have taken less than 3 hours, represented the final stage of his premeditated plan to murder his wife and start a new life with Sherry Campbell. The drive to Erie gave Jack time to consider what he was about to do. With each mile that passed, he was moving further from any possibility of changing course or finding a different solution to his problems. Yet there's no evidence to suggest that he wavered in his determination or felt any remorse for the crime he had already committed. Upon arriving at the house in Erie, Jack proceeded to carry out the most disturbing aspect of his plan. Rather than simply burying Noreen's body in a remote location where it might never be found, he had decided to inter her beneath the basement floor of the house, where he planned to live with Sherry. This decision reveals something particularly chilling about Jack's psychology. He wasn't just trying to hide evidence of his crime. He He was planning to literally build his new life on top of his wife's grave. The symbolism was as disturbing as it was practical. He would start fresh with Sherry while Noreen remained trapped beneath their feet, silenced forever. Jack dug a grave in the basement floor, placed Noreen's body inside, and then poured fresh concrete over the site. To anyone who might visit the house in the future, the basement would appear normal, perhaps recently renovated. Only Jack would know the terrible secret that lay beneath the surface. Back in Mansfield, Noreen's sudden disappearance quickly raised concerns among family and friends. The story that she had left on an unexpected vacation didn't align with what people knew about her character and her devotion to her children. Noreen's relatives were particularly skeptical of Jack's explanation. They knew that she would never abandon her children, especially during the holidays and especially without any prior indication that she was planning to travel. Her absence felt wrong to everyone who knew her, and their concerns soon reached the attention of law enforcement. As investigators began to look into Noreen's disappearance, they quickly identified several inconsistencies in Jack's story. The timing of her supposed departure, the lack of any evidence that she had packed for a trip, and the absence of any communication from her all raised red flags. Police began to investigate Jack's activities and movements, and it didn't take long for them to uncover information about the house in Erie and his relationship with Sherry Campbell. The picture that emerged was of a man who had both motive and opportunity to harm his wife. 3 weeks after Noreen Boyle vanished from her home in Mansfield, investigators made the grim discovery that confirmed their worst fears. Acting on evidence they had gathered about Jack's activities and his connection to the Erie property, police obtained a search warrant for the house. When they arrived at the basement, investigators noticed that one section of the concrete floor appeared newer than the rest. The surface looked recently poured. There were subtle differences in color and texture that suggested something had been buried beneath. Using specialized equipment, investigators carefully broke through the concrete, and what they found would shock even experienced detectives who had seen countless crime scenes. Noreen Boyle's body was exactly where they expected to find it, wrapped in the green tarp that Jack had used to transport her from their home. The plastic bag was still tied around her head, providing investigators with clear evidence of how she had died. The condition of her remains and the way she had been positioned in the makeshift grave told the story of a crime that had been planned and executed with chilling precision. For the investigators who uncovered Noreen's body, this wasn't just another case to solve. The brutality of the murder and the calculated way that Jack had attempted to conceal it represented one of the most disturbing crimes they had ever encountered. With Noreen's body recovered and the evidence mounting against him, Jack Boyle was arrested and charged with her murder. The man who had once been respected in his community as a successful physician now faced the possibility of spending the rest of his life in prison. The case that prosecutors built against Jack was comprehensive and damning. They had physical evidence from the crime scene, testimony from witnesses who could establish his movements and behavior, and most powerfully, they had the testimony of his own son. Collier Boyle, now having to process the reality that his father had killed his mother, provided investigators with crucial information about what he had heard on the night of the murder. The screams and thuds that had awakened him provided a timeline for the crime and corroborated the physical evidence that investigators had gathered. The trial that followed was a media sensation in Ohio. The story of a prominent doctor who had murdered his wife and buried her under his new house captured public attention and dominated local news coverage. For many people in the community, it was impossible to reconcile the image of Dr. Jack Boyle as a respected physician with the evidence that he was a cold-blooded killer. During the proceedings, prosecutors painted a picture of a man who had become so obsessed with starting a new life that he was willing to commit murder rather than deal with the complications of divorce. They argued that Jack's actions were not those of a man who had acted in passion or anger, but rather someone who had planned every detail of his crime months in advance. In June 1990, after considering all the evidence presented during the trial, a jury found John Francis Boyle Jr. guilty of the aggravated murder of his wife, Noreen. The verdict brought a measure of justice for Noreen's family and friends, but it could never undo the tragedy that had torn apart so many lives. Jack was sentenced to 20 years to life in prison, meaning that he would have to serve at least 2 decades behind bars before becoming eligible for parole. For a man who had once enjoyed all the privileges and respect that came with being a successful physician, this sentence represented the complete destruction of everything he had worked to achieve. But perhaps the most tragic aspect of this case wasn't Jack's fall from grace. It was the impact on the children who had lost both of their parents in one terrible night. Collier and Elizabeth Boyle had to grapple with the reality that their mother was dead, and their father was her killer, Young Collier, in particular, carried an enormous burden. Not only had he lost his mother in the most violent way imaginable, but he had also played a crucial role in ensuring that her killer was brought to justice. The testimony he provided helped prosecutors secure Jack's conviction, but it also meant that he had to confront the reality of his father's guilt in a very public way. The years that followed, Jack Boyle's conviction were difficult ones for the surviving members of the family. Collier and Elizabeth had to rebuild their lives without either parent, relying on extended family and the support of their community to help them navigate the challenges of growing up in the shadow of such a terrible crime. For Collier, in particular, the experience of testifying against his father and helping to solve his mother's murder had a profound impact on his development and his understanding of justice. As he grew older, he began to process the full implications of what had happened to his family and how his father's actions had changed the trajectory of his life forever. The case also had lasting effects on the community of Mansfield, where people struggled to understand how someone they had trusted with their health and well-being could be capable of such a heinous crime. The revelation that Dr. Jack Boyle was a murderer forced many people to question their assumptions about human nature and the masks that people can wear in public. Throughout his years in prison, Jack Boyle maintained his innocence, despite the overwhelming evidence that had led to his conviction. This denial was particularly painful for his children, who had hoped that he might eventually acknowledge his guilt and provide them with some form of closure or explanation. In 2016, more than 25 years after the murder, Collier Boyle returned to Ohio as an adult, determined to confront his imprisoned father and seek some form of truth or reconciliation. The visit was part of a documentary project that would chronicle Collier's journey to understand his father's crime and its impact on his own life. During their prison meeting, Jack continued to deny that he had killed Noreen, despite all the evidence to the contrary. For Collier, this denial was both frustrating and heartbreaking. As an adult, he had hoped that his father might finally be willing to acknowledge the truth and take responsibility for his actions. The refusal to admit guilt meant that Collier would never receive the explanation or apology that might have provided some measure of peace. Instead, he had to accept that his father would take his secrets to the grave, leaving behind only questions and pain for those who had loved Noreen. As Jack Boyle's minimum sentence of 20 years approached, the question of parole became a source of anxiety and concern for Noreen's family and friends. The thought that her killer might be released from prison was deeply troubling to those who remembered her life and mourned her death. In recent years, Jack has appeared before parole boards multiple times, seeking release from prison. Each hearing forces Collier and other family members to relive the trauma of Noreen's murder and argue against Jack's release. The parole hearings also serve as reminders of the ongoing impact of Jack's crime. Nearly 4 decades after Noreen's death, her family continues to live with the consequences of his actions. They must repeatedly make the case that he should remain in prison, reliving their loss and trauma with each hearing. For Collier, these hearings represent an ongoing struggle for justice. As the son who helped solve his mother's murder, he feels a responsibility to ensure that her killer remains accountable for his actions. But each hearing also reopens wounds that have never fully healed. The murder of Noreen Marie Boyle serves as a stark reminder of how domestic violence can escalate to its most extreme and tragic conclusion. Her death was not the result of a moment of passion or a sudden loss of control. It was the culmination of careful planning by a man who viewed murder as a solution to his personal problems. The case also highlights the importance of believing and protecting those who fear for their safety in domestic situations. Noreen's prophetic warning to her son that if anything happens to me, your father did it, suggests that she sensed the danger she was in, but tragically that awareness wasn't enough to save her life. For investigators and prosecutors, the Boyle case demonstrated the importance of thorough investigation and the power of physical evidence in securing convictions. The discovery of Noreen's body beneath the basement floor provided irrefutable proof of Jack's guilt and ensured that he would face consequences for his actions. While Jack Boyle's crime received significant media attention and became the subject of documentaries and true crime stories, it's important to remember that at the center of this tragedy was a real person whose life was cut short by violence. Noreen Boyle was more than just a victim of domestic violence. She was a mother who loved her children, a woman who had supported her husband's career and contributed to her community. Her death robbed her children of their mother and deprived the world of whatever contributions she might have made in the years that followed. The fact that she was murdered in such a calculated and callous way makes her death even more tragic. She trusted the man who killed her, lived with him, shared a life and children with him, never knowing that he was capable of such violence. Today, decades after her death, Noreen is remembered not just as a victim, but as a person whose life had value and meaning. Her story serves as a reminder that behind every true crime story is a real person whose death represents an irreplaceable loss to those who love them. The murder of Noreen Marie Boyle stands as one of the most chilling examples of premeditated domestic violence in American criminal history. It demonstrates how far someone will go to escape the responsibilities and complications of their existing life, and how the desire for a fresh start can lead to the most terrible of crimes. Jack Boyle's careful planning of his wife's murder, his methodical disposal of her body, and his continued denial of guilt reveal a level of coldness and calculation that is difficult to comprehend. His actions destroyed multiple lives, not just Noreen's, but also those of his children, who had to live with the knowledge that their father had killed their mother. The case also serves as a testament to the resilience of those who survive such tragedies. Collier Boyle's courage in testifying against his father and his determination to seek truth and justice, even decades later, represent a kind of strength that emerges from the deepest trauma. As we conclude this story, we're reminded that true crime isn't just about the criminals and their methods. It's about the real people whose lives are forever changed by violence. Noreen Marie Boyle deserved better than the fate that befell her on that New Year's Eve, and her memory deserves to be honored, and her story serves as a reminder of the importance of protecting those who may be in danger from the people they trust most. The quiet suburban house in Mansfield, Ohio, where this tragedy began, may appear peaceful to those who pass by today, but for those who know its history, it will forever be remembered as the place where a mother's life ended and a family's world was shattered by the ultimate betrayal. In the end, Jack Boyle's plan to start a new life with Sherry Campbell never came to fruition. Instead of the freedom he sought, he found only the confines of a prison cell. And instead of the fresh start he had envisioned, he created a legacy of pain and loss that continues to affect his children and all those who loved Noreen. The basement in Erie, Pennsylvania, where he thought he had buried his past, instead became the place where his future ended. Justice may have been delayed, but it was not denied. And Noreen Marie Boyle's death was not in vain if it serves as a warning about the dangers that can lurk behind the facades of respectability and success. Rest peacefully, Noreen. Your story has been told, your life has been remembered, and your children have grown into adults who honor your memory by seeking truth and justice in a world that too often fails to protect the innocent. Please, if you're still awake, let's move on to our last story. Story 5. In the warm coastal city of Pensacola, Florida, where the Gulf breeze carries the scent of salt water and the promise of new beginnings, a woman named Taylor Wright was preparing for what she believed would be the best chapter of her life. It was September 2017, and at 33 years old, Taylor had already lived through enough experiences to fill several lifetimes. Taylor wasn't just any ordinary resident of this Gulf Coast community. She had dedicated years of her life to law enforcement, working as a police officer and later as a crime scene technician for the Escambia County Sheriff's Office. The irony of what would later unfold is almost too painful to contemplate. A woman who had spent her career investigating crimes, collecting evidence, and seeking justice for others, would herself become the victim of the very type of case she had worked so many times before. But in September 2017, Taylor's focus wasn't on the darkness she had witnessed in her professional life. Instead, she was looking toward the light. She had recently begun working as a private investigator, a natural progression from her law enforcement background that allowed her to help people in a different way. More importantly to her personal happiness, she had found love again with Cassandra Waller, a school administrator who brought stability and joy into Taylor's world. Their relationship hadn't been without its challenges. Taylor had struggled with occasional drug use, and had made mistakes that tested their bond. There had been moments of infidelity that could have ended everything between them. But love, when it's real, has a way of weathering storms that would destroy lesser connections. Taylor and Cassandra had worked through their problems with the kind of commitment that comes from knowing you've found something worth fighting for. By September 2017, they had made the decision to move in together. It was a big step, one that represented not just a practical arrangement, but a declaration of their commitment to building a future together. Taylor was in the process of finalizing her divorce from her ex-husband Jeff Wright, and looking forward to closing that chapter of her life so she could fully embrace this new one. The divorce proceedings had been contentious, as many divorces are when significant assets are involved. Taylor and Jeff had a joint bank account containing $100,000, money that represented years of savings, shared dreams that had since faded. and the practical reality of dividing a life they had once built together. As part of preparing for her new life, Taylor made the decision to withdraw her portion of those funds. $100,000 is a substantial amount of money, and Taylor was wise enough to know that carrying or storing such a sum required careful consideration. She had recently reconnected with an old friend and colleague, someone she trusted implicitly, Ashley MacArthur. Ashley, like Taylor, had worked in law enforcement. She had been a crime scene technician for the Pensacola Police Department, which meant she understood the importance of trust, integrity, and loyalty. These were people who had sworn to protect and serve, who had dedicated their careers to upholding justice. Ashley was 40 years old, 7 years older than Taylor. Their friendship was built on the solid foundation of shared professional experiences and mutual respect. When Taylor found herself in possession of a large sum of cash and needing someone trustworthy to help her manage it, Ashley seemed like the perfect choice. Taylor gave Ashley $34,000 to hold for safekeeping, money she planned to use as she started her new life with Cassandra. It was a decision based on trust, friendship, and the belief that people who had worked together in law enforcement shared an unbreakable bond of integrity. Taylor had no way of knowing that Ashley MacArthur was not the person she appeared to be. Unknown to Taylor, Ashley had been living a secret life of financial desperation and criminal activity. Between 2015 and 2017, Ashley had been systematically stealing money, running various fraudulent schemes, and living far beyond her means. She had burned down her own business in an insurance fraud scheme, and was facing charges of arson, racketeering, and fraud. The money that Taylor had entrusted to her wasn't being kept safe. It was being spent to fund Ashley's increasingly desperate attempts to maintain her lifestyle and cover her mounting debts. September 8, 2017, dawned like any other day in Pensacola. The sun rose over the Gulf of Mexico, painting the sky in soft pastels that would later seem impossibly peaceful given what was about to unfold. Taylor Wright woke up that morning with plans to run some errands with her friend Ashley. It was meant to be a routine day. Perhaps they would go to the bank, maybe grab lunch, catch up on life the way friends do. Cassandra watched Taylor leave that morning, probably giving her a kiss goodbye and telling her to have a good day. Neither woman had any way of knowing it would be the last time they would see each other alive. Taylor and Ashley spent most of that day together. They went about their business, and to any outside observer, they would have appeared to be exactly what they were supposed to be. Two friends enjoying each other's company, but beneath the surface, tension was building. Taylor had been asking Ashley about her money. She needed it back. She was starting her new life, moving in with Cassandra, and she needed access to the funds she had entrusted to her friend. Ashley knew she didn't have the money. She had spent it. $34,000 that belonged to Taylor Wright had been used to prop up Ashley's house of cards. And now that house was collapsing. When someone entrusts you with their life savings and asks for it back, what do you say when it's gone? How do you explain that you've stolen from a friend who trusted you completely? For most people, this would be a moment of shame, confession, and attempts at restitution. For Ashley MacArthur, it became something much darker. At some point during that day, Ashley made a decision that would destroy multiple lives forever. She decided that rather than face the consequences of her theft, rather than admit what she had done and find a way to make it right, she would eliminate the problem entirely. She would kill Taylor Wright. The details of exactly what happened next may never be fully known. What investigators would later discover is that Ashley initially planned to kill Taylor by secretly mixing cocaine into her beer. The plan was to make it look like an accidental overdose, a tragic end to someone who had struggled with substance abuse in the past. It would have been the perfect cover story, playing into assumptions people might make and deflecting suspicion from the real motive. But for reasons that remain unclear, that plan didn't work. Perhaps Taylor didn't drink enough of the tainted beer. Perhaps the dosage was wrong. Perhaps some instinct warned her away from consuming something that would have killed her. Whatever the reason, Ashley found herself facing a still very much alive Taylor Wright, who was still asking for her money back. So Ashley turned to a more direct method. At some point during their day together, she shot Taylor Wright in the back of the head. It was an execution-style killing, cold and calculated. Taylor never saw it coming. One moment she was with someone she trusted, someone she considered a close friend, and the next moment her life was over. But killing Taylor was only the beginning of Ashley's criminal enterprise that day. Now she had a body to dispose of, and as a former crime scene technician, she knew exactly how thorough investigators could be. She wrapped Taylor's body in a hammock and transported it to a remote farm property in Cantonment, Florida, outside of Pensacola. There she buried her friend in a makeshift grave, hoping the earth would keep her secret forever. Ashley then began an elaborate charade designed to make it appear that Taylor had simply disappeared voluntarily. Using Taylor's phone, she sent a text message to Cassandra saying that she needed to get away for a few days. It was the kind of message that might make sense coming from someone going through a difficult divorce, someone who might need space to think and process. The text message bought Ashley time, but not much. When Taylor failed to return home, when days passed without any further communication, Cassandra became increasingly worried. Taylor wasn't the type of person to simply vanish without explanation, especially not now when they were taking such important steps in their relationship. Something was wrong, and Cassandra knew it. She contacted the police, and missing person case was opened. Initially, investigators had little to go on. Missing adult cases are always challenging because adults have the right to disappear if they choose to. The text message to Cassandra suggesting Taylor needed time away provided a plausible explanation for her absence, at least initially. But as investigators began to dig deeper into Taylor's life, inconsistencies started to emerge. They spoke with Ashley MacArthur, who was identified as the last person to see Taylor alive. Ashley played her part well initially, expressing concern for her missing friend and cooperating with the investigation. She told investigators about their day together, carefully omitting any mention of the money Taylor had been asking about. Ashley even went so far as to participate in searches for Taylor, joining the very efforts designed to find the woman she had murdered. It was a performance that required incredible coldness. To stand alongside Taylor's loved ones, to comfort Cassandra in her worry and fear, all while knowing exactly where Taylor was and what had happened to her. But Ashley had made a crucial error. In her attempt to make Taylor's disappearance look voluntary, she had used Taylor's phone to send that text message to Cassandra. What she didn't account for was the sophisticated cell phone tracking technology available to investigators. When detectives examined Taylor's phone records, they found something that shattered Ashley's story completely. The text message that was supposed to have been sent by Taylor, telling Cassandra she needed to get away, had been sent from a location nowhere near where Taylor was supposed to be. The cell tower data showed that the phone had been in an area consistent with the farm property in Cantonment, the same property where Ashley had buried Taylor's body. This discovery changed everything. Suddenly, what had appeared to be a missing person case became a homicide investigation. The focus shifted entirely to Ashley MacArthur, and she knew it. As investigators pressed harder with their questions, as the evidence began to point increasingly in her direction, Ashley stopped cooperating with the investigation. On October 9, 2017, just over a month after Taylor Wright had disappeared, investigators obtained a search warrant for the farm property in Cantonment. They arrived with cadaver dogs, ground-penetrating radar, and the methodical approach that characterizes major crime scene investigations. They were looking for a body, and they found one, within 2 hours of beginning their search. Investigators discovered human remains buried in the remote location. The body was wrapped in a hammock, just as Ashley had left it. But even more compelling was what they found with the remains. A necklace that investigators recognized from photographs of Taylor Wright. The moment investigators saw that necklace, they knew they had found Taylor. Lead prosecutor Bridget Jensen would later say that her gut told her at that point that it was going to be Taylor, and dental records would soon confirm what everyone already knew in their hearts. Ashley MacArthur was arrested and charged with first-degree premeditated murder. The woman who had once worked to solve crimes was now facing the most serious charge in the criminal justice system. The evidence against her was overwhelming. The cell phone records, the missing money, her lies to investigators, and ultimately the discovery of Taylor's body in a location connected to Ashley. But Ashley's legal troubles didn't end with the murder charge. Investigators had also uncovered her extensive financial crimes. She was facing additional charges of arson, racketeering, and fraud related to the systematic theft and insurance fraud she had been committing for years. The murder of Taylor Wright, it turned out, was just the most extreme example of Ashley's willingness to destroy others to protect herself. The case went to trial in 2019, nearly 2 years after Taylor's murder. The prosecution laid out a compelling case that painted Ashley MacArthur as a woman who had betrayed the ultimate trust, They showed how she had stolen money from a friend who had trusted her completely, and how she had murdered that friend rather than face the consequences of her theft. The defense faced an almost impossible task. How do you defend someone whose own actions had created such a clear trail of evidence? How do you explain away the cell phone records, the buried body, the missing money, and the web of lies? They couldn't, and they didn't succeed. Ashley MacArthur was found guilty of first-degree premeditated murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring that she would never again have the opportunity to betray someone's trust or destroy another life in service of her own selfish needs. But the story doesn't end with Ashley's conviction, because the real tragedy of this case extends far beyond the courtroom. Taylor Wright was just 33 years old when she was murdered. She was at the beginning of what should have been the happiest chapter of her life. She had found love with Cassandra, was building a new career as a private investigator, and was finally putting the challenges of her past behind her. Cassandra Waller lost not just a girlfriend, but the future they had been planning together, the home they were going to share, the life they were going to build, the simple everyday moments of happiness that make life worth living. All of that was stolen along with Taylor's life. Taylor's family lost a daughter, a sister, a person who had dedicated her professional life to helping others and seeking justice. The law enforcement community lost someone who had served with distinction and integrity, someone who understood the importance of protecting the innocent and holding the guilty accountable. The broader community lost faith in the very people they trust to protect them. When someone who has sworn to uphold justice commits murder, it shakes the foundation of everything we believe about law and order. It reminds us that evil can hide behind a badge, behind years of service, behind the facade of friendship and trust. Ashley MacArthur's crimes rippled outward like stones thrown into still water, touching countless lives in ways both obvious and subtle. Every case she had worked as a crime scene technician was potentially compromised by questions about her integrity. Every person who had trusted her felt the sting of that betrayal. Every friend and colleague who had believed in her had to confront the reality that they had been deceived. The farm where Taylor's body was found became a crime scene that would forever be associated with this tragedy. The community of Pensacola, which should have been a place where Taylor could start fresh and build a new life, became instead the site of her murder and the setting for a trial that exposed the depths of human betrayal. In the end, Ashley MacArthur's attempt to cover up her financial crimes by committing murder had accomplished nothing except the destruction of more lives. The $34,000 she stole was gone, spent on maintaining a lifestyle she couldn't afford. Taylor Wright was dead, killed by someone she had trusted completely. Ashley herself was facing life in prison, her own life effectively over at the age of 40. The case serves as a reminder of how quickly trust can be shattered, and lives destroyed when greed and desperation override basic human decency. Taylor Wright made the reasonable decision to trust a friend and colleague with her money, and that decision cost her everything. Ashley MacArthur made the unreasonable decision to steal from that friend, and then kill her to cover up the theft, and that decision cost her everything as well. As we reflect on this tragic case, it's worth remembering that Taylor Wright was more than just a victim. She was a woman who had dedicated her life to serving others. First as a police officer and crime scene technician, and later as a private investigator, she had overcome personal challenges and found love and happiness with Cassandra. She was someone's daughter, someone's friend, someone's hope for the future. Her death represents not just the loss of one life, but the loss of all the good she would have done, all the people she would have helped, all the love she would have shared. In a career dedicated to seeking justice for others, Taylor Wright became someone for whom justice had to be sought, and thankfully it was found. Ashley MacArthur sits in prison today, serving a life sentence that ensures she will never again have the opportunity to betray someone's trust. So completely, but no sentence can bring Taylor Wright back, cannot undo the pain inflicted on those who loved her, and cannot erase the reminder that sometimes the people we trust most are capable of the greatest betrayals. The case of Taylor Wright reminds us to hold our friendships dear, but also to remember that trust, once broken, can never be fully repaired. It reminds us that greed and desperation can drive people to unthinkable acts, that the consequences of our choices ripple outward in ways we may never fully comprehend. In the quiet moments, when the courtroom has emptied and the headlines have faded, what remains is the memory of a woman who deserved better than the death she received, and the hope that justice, though it came too late to save her, serves as some small comfort to those who loved her. and as a warning to those who might be tempted to follow a similar path of betrayal and violence. The Gulf breeze still carries the scent of salt water over Pensacola, and somewhere in that coastal city, people continue to trust their friends, build their relationships, and plan their futures. The story of Taylor Wright serves as both a tragedy and a reminder that life is precious, trust is sacred, and justice, though sometimes delayed, will ultimately prevail. Soft fade to peaceful conclusion. Tonight, as you drift off to sleep, perhaps you'll remember Taylor Wright, not for how she died, but for how she lived. In service to others, in love with someone who cherished her, and in hope for a future that was stolen from her far too soon. And perhaps, in some small way, her story will remind us all to treasure the trust we place in others, and to prove worthy of the trust they place in us. Thank you for listening to tonight's true crime story. Rest peacefully knowing that another story awaits you next time, ready to accompany you on another journey toward restorative sleep. But if you're still awake, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss our next true crime stories. And until next time, stay safe and take care. Good night.